I want to welcome you all. So thank you for being here. This is a conversation about education funding, Governor Scott's recent proposal to revote all the school budgets in light of the $140 million shortfall in the education fund. And joining me for this conversation today, we have Joel Cook, who's the retired executive director of the Vermont NEA. And we also have Kim Gleason, who is the vice chair of the Essex-Westford School Board. We have Nora Skolnick, a teacher at Randolph Elementary School, and Bob Thibault, the principal of Leland and Gray Union Middle and High School. So we tried to get a range of different perspectives from our school systems to talk about this proposal and our schools in the current moment. And I just want to thank you all and express real appreciation for you joining me this morning for this conversation. Right now, Vermonters and parents around the country, I think, are realizing really how valuable our schools are, how much teachers and our schools provide to students and to our communities. For many folks are realizing it's much harder to work when you're trying to take care of your kids at home at the same time. They're recognizing how hard it is to teach as they're watching their kids learn at home, or some kids, depending on internet access and computer access, how much goes into teaching and the work that goes into planning and educating. And so I think Vermonters, like I said, and folks across the country have maybe a reawakened appreciation for what our schools do with our kids and helping our kids and our families. In any case, we also, when we're looking at this shortfall for education and budgets, we're looking at our schools, our colleges and technical training centers that also are employers in the state. And these cuts would mean potentially putting out of work more people. An April 30th report from the Learning Policy Institute think tank modeled the impact of the Great Recession from 2008 and 2009 with today's numbers. And they are predicting Vermont to be one of the hardest hit states, losing almost potentially 20% of our teaching workforce, which is approximately 1,800 teachers. And at this moment in time, with the financial impact of COVID-19, and already more than 40,000 Vermonters out of work, it's really almost impossible to imagine the impact of another 2,000 more on the state's economy being unemployed. And of course, the individual impact on students and teachers is much more than just what those numbers are. Certainly, folks who know me know that I believe an investment in education is one of the best investments we can make. It's about our future. It's about our kids being well-rounded individuals, ready to not only be productive members on the economic side of our society, but also well-rounded as members of our communities to really participate, as we see in Vermont, with people helping each other through this challenging time. You know, these students are going to be our future leaders. They're going to be future business owners. They're going to be members of our community. They're going to live in our communities. They're going to be workers, parents, and of course, Vermonters, as everybody with me today are. So I'm going to start the conversation with asking Joel Cook to give a little bit of a history on the range of different funding systems for our schools and some of the reasons for per pupil cost increases, because I know him from his work in the building, and he was there through different iterations of school funding. And I just want to say before I go to Joel, well, no, we'll go right to Joel with that. And Joel, can you give us a little history on funding?
I can. I can't do it in the time allotted. I'm going to skip right over details and use just topic sentences. Act 60 became reality, and the Ed Fund was established in the late 1990s. Before that time, schools were funded in ways that simply did not provide for an equitable distribution of funds, particularly to low income, generally low wealth communities. The problem we're facing right now arises, well, aside from the disaster that we're all experiencing, is how to fill the gap left by revenue shortfalls in the education fund. And this is just an idea, and I don't want it to monopolize the limited time we have, but the idea is to look back over the last 20 years or so of the education fund for examples of measures taken by the state that shift the cost of what used to be social services or other services that were not originally thought to be part of the education fund, and which increase the burden on the education fund, and wonder if the following doesn't make sense. If there are limitations imposed on us by the federal government in use of the CARES Act funds, could we look to some of the shifts in cost from the general fund to the education fund over the last 20 years or so, and basically shift into reverse and reestablish those items as elements of cost for the general fund instead? That might be able to free us from some of the strictures placed on us by the feds. The basic example, there are about 10 or 15 examples, but the basic example really came in 2011, if I remember right, when the state established a permanent cut in the education fund in the amount of $23 million. That $23 million was spent in some other way. And I can't help but wonder if the Joint Fiscal Office or some other folks in the Agency of Education couldn't do some history and determine if, in fact, there's a way of reallocating some of the money that now is spent through the education fund back into the general fund and avoid any federal problem. Like I say, we should do something like that, but
yeah, no, it's, we are facing challenges. We're seeing declining enrollments and trying to figure out ways to, of course, maintain high quality education is critically important. And I think people across the state value it, but there are these issues of how the state budgets and allocates the resources with the goal of giving everyone opportunity and an equal opportunity as enshrined in our Constitution with limited resources. So I want to go to our teacher, Nora, and the reason I want to bring it to that is I've had around 4 different roundtable discussions with teachers and educators to learn more about their experiences teaching remotely and how this has worked, how it hasn't worked, ways that it's really exposed inequality and inequity and challenges that people face who may or may not have the same support structures at home for education. So the impact on the students. And I think there are impacts, differences based on school district, age of students, and various other factors. And maybe Nora, if you could help give us a little bit of your knowledge and experience about what you're seeing and what do you think in particular students' needs are going to be this fall, as maybe we can get through this year, but what happens in the fall?
Well, I think what's happening this year is going to have a huge impact on what's happening in the fall because students are traumatized, from all of this, and the needs are going to be double, if not triple, what they currently are. So I'm going to say this is not the time to be pulling resources. This is the time to be putting in more resources than we currently have. I think people are starting to realize that schools are more than just a place where children are learning reading, writing, math, and those academics, those traditional academics, but we really provide a lot of social services as well. We provide counseling, we provide food, we give kids emotional support, we give them a structure to their day that a lot of kids really need. Unfortunately, for some students, school is one of the safest places for them to be, and they need that structure that school provides. And right now, the students, I see students who are, well, some of my highest academic students are struggling because of the situation that we're all in, and we're going to need to address those needs in the fall. And that's not even looking at students who have special education needs that are really difficult to meet right now. It's when you're communicating through video and you don't have that immediate back and forth that you have in the classroom, when you can look over and you can see, oh, this kid didn't get this one piece and now I can step in, or they're having a hard day, I can do some things to help support them to get them started on a better foot. And it just compounds all the problems that we have. Special education students, where I was going with that is, I teach 3rd and 4th grade, and yet I have some students who are really struggling to read, and yet that's one of the primary ways that we're communicating is on platforms where they have to read directions. Even if they hear me read it to them, they don't have that feedback of being able to ask me questions about it. So we're losing a lot of kids in all of this that way. And it's going to be difficult to pick up the pieces, and who knows where things are going to be in the fall. Is it going to be safe to be together in a classroom? So I think that's things that we need to think about and plan for.
Well, thank you. I'm curious to hear what Bob has to say on some of this same topic as a principal of a school. Hearing from your teachers what's working, what isn't working, and how to plan for the fall. I think the Agency of Education is asking you to plan 2 or 3 different scenarios, and yet at the same time, and I'll cycle back to Joel on this a little bit, the administration is talking about shifting budgets. How are you supposed to plan for the fall with 2 or 3 different scenarios impacting the kids, and what's the impact on the kids while dealing with the budget issues? So for now, let's focus on the kids and what you're sort of seeing and hearing about that. But I'm gonna roll into that other bit in a minute as well.
Yeah, I mean, kids are struggling. There's no doubt about that. I've been involved in a bunch of visits out to some homes as well, and I think the trauma that Nora spoke of, kids who find school to be their safe place are now in homes that may not be safe for prolonged periods of time, and that is absolutely going to have an impact on them. And some of those kids are going to be angry, and they're going to be angry at us because we're the ones that wouldn't let them come. And so we're going to have to figure out how to deal with all that. And I think also the academic gaps are going to grow. Kids are not engaging in this in the way that they would engage if it was live. Some kids are excelling with it. I will say that there are some kids who really love this and are doing better than they were when they were here. But that's a very small minority. Most kids are struggling with it, or they're doing minimum work, and so I think the academic gaps are going to have to be addressed as well. Not to mention, as you said, the logistics of what that looks like when they're here. The CDC guidelines that have been put out are pretty interesting and alarming in a lot of ways around what classrooms and schools could look like and not look like. And so we're doing a lot of thinking right now, but I would prefer to wait till we get closer to have more information around what the logistics look like, because it's almost really hard. It's almost too hard to do a lot of deep thinking about it right at this time.
Yeah, Nora, you look like you have a thought on that you want to add.
I think one of the other concerns that as a teacher I have is that we're not really at the table when these decisions are being made. Not that I have all of the answers, but I think you need to have teachers as part of the decision-making group that's coming up with those answers for the fall.
Indeed. And I'm curious, how you're planning how the fall is going to go. I'm going to circle it back to Joel because I jumped on to the next question before really discussing funding of schools. Bob, you're working on trying to figure out fall plans within the construct of the situation, and at the same time, if there's going to be new votes happening, which I hope we don't do, what's the impact there? And I'm going to go to Kim for a second here to ask, as a school board member, what was your reaction to the governor's proposal, and how do you plan for that while trying to give the Bobs and the Noras of the world any idea of how to plan for the fall?
Yeah, we are actually among the 19 districts that don't have a budget right now. We were originally to have voted April 14th. We typically vote in April, or have historically as long as I can recall. So we were unable to hold that vote. We just finished stuffing and sending 16,000 plus ballots out to all registered or voters, active voters in our communities in Essex and Essex Junction and Westford. It was an extraordinary effort by many volunteer hours, all in the interest of ensuring the safety of our poll workers, our voters, and in the interest of making sure they're not compromising their safety for exercising their democratic rights. And so we embraced it. We felt it important to go this route, and we leaned in and did the work on that. It was Herculean, so I can't begin to imagine. Our vote is June 2nd. If we were to need to go back, whether or not that passes, based on conversations from the governor's team on revoting, even with past budgets, I cannot begin to imagine how that happens safely, even if it were to be aligned with the August primary. I find that to be very difficult to imagine the opportunity to sort of rethink our budgets, not knowing what our fall is going to look like. We are certain that skinny budgets are not a thing for education. We won't have skinny needs. We won't have fewer kids. We won't have fewer needs for teachers or support in education. So where we might be able to look quarterly at other agencies of the state government, I hope people can appreciate and understand the anticipated needs. Nora shared them well, as did Bob. And I think that we as school board members are well aware. There is, frankly, not a lot that we can do with the way contracts work as well. So we have secured our staffing. And we've done so as we've thought about our budgets the first time around, with real eye to class size guidelines, social emotional learning needs. We were very disciplined in our approach to building our budget the first time around. It's a 2.5% increase in ed spending. We had a slight decline in pupils, so it's a 3.2 increase in per pupil spending. So that's in our first round, and we really felt we didn't have other places to go with that, and try to ensure the future for our kids for next year in a very uncertain environment. I don't think that's going to change. I don't see how sending school boards back to try and work on budgets with limited tools is going to change when we also don't know what we're planning for. So I think we share all those concerns. We do not recommend that there be a statewide cut, but if there were to be, then it should not have to also require another vote. If we're being mandated, then mandate it, provide the tools, and don't require us to go back to those. Matter.
Yeah, it seems as though certainly if it goes all the way to August 11th, you're only talking about 2.5, 3 weeks before teachers, quote, return for the fall. And I put that in quotes because I know a lot of teachers are doing planning work during the summer. They're thinking about the upcoming year. So it's not like they really leave for the whole summer the way some people imagine. But then for folks like Bob, and I want to go to Bob for a second, how would you be able to cope with budget shifts that happen, 3 weeks before the doors open of your school in the fall, especially if it's massive cuts when you're seeing really greatly increased needs that Nora and I've heard from many other teachers have talked about?
I'll be blunt. We can't. There's no way. It's we talk about 80% or more of our budget. So reductions, if you're going to get significant reductions, it has to come out of staffing. And frankly, those are the people on the front lines working with these kids that we just described are going to have much more need coming out, both academically and social emotionally. So I don't know what that would look like, but I know that it would be catastrophic for our children. No matter how you slice it, it's just we need more supports, not less. We should, that's really what it comes down to. Thinking about having more counselors, more social workers, more clinicians, people like that who will be able to provide that level of support. Academic support teachers, particularly at the lower grades. I'm a middle and high school, but I'm thinking of elementary schools where they're going to need kids who have reading gaps that are huge and significant, and will impact them. Will drive up dropout rates 10 years down the road that we're not even thinking about right now for those kids if they haven't achieved a reading level by grade 2 or 3 or whatever the magic survey, the research says. Yeah, it's alarming to think about additional cuts at this point. And we're also a district that has not yet passed. We had a March date that didn't happen, and we're scheduled for June 10, but we're hoping for some solution from the state that makes sense, and not skinny budgets, and not something that requires people who have already passed to revote. It's silliness. We need to have the resources we need for our kids and figure out what that means. If it's federal money, if it's, I don't know.
Well, and I think there is the question of whether some CARES Act money could be used, because if there's added expenses generated by the demands that COVID-19 have put on our education system, there's been a lot of talk about expanding broadband into a lot of rural areas so that remote learning would be possible in the case of another surge in cases in the fall. As you know, as we're opening up our society, and as it gets colder in the fall, there's that strong risk of that occurring. And maybe there's room to say, look, an added expense is the need for more of what you just talked about, Bob. Social workers, added paraeducators to help kids catch up on lost time, both in the spring here as well as the normal summer loss that now is going to be exacerbated by this extended strange learning situation. Do any of you want to touch on that and the possibility of other funding sources? I don't know if Joel, you have thoughts or ideas about education funding and the possibility of the CARES Act, or maybe the HEROES Act that's currently languishing in the US Senate, but some version of municipal support is just, it's got to come through from Washington. Joel, are you following that at all?
Wishful thinking on my part, and I'm no expert on this stuff. To be blunt, I'm following along with this like most retirees do, and not as in my former incarnation, David. But I do know this, what each of the other folks has said is absolutely the case. We can't provide a high quality education unless, frankly, the state finds a way to keep all the lights on and keep all the fires burning, keep our kids healthy, keep our kids well supervised so that their parents can contribute to the overall economy. And if we're not able to do that, then we're in for a very long haul problem. I couldn't agree more with what Bob just said, and I'm no educator by profession, but the loss of educational opportunities now doesn't bode well for the ability of our kids to maintain their learning throughout the course of the balance of their childhood and into adulthood. These are long-term problems that are being addressed, and they have to be addressed as though they are long-term problems. Everything I said about education funding is sort of weedy, and we get lost in the weeds. But the overall issue here is, how are we going to make sure that the next generation of adults in this state are fully capable and fully trained, socially, academically, and otherwise, so that they can take off, that maybe they do a better job than we were doing.
Yeah, and we're in a situation where now there's more difficult education environments to try and meet the needs of the kids and the needs of our society, and helping these kids shape and develop into the best people they can be. And I'm going to go back to Bob here for a minute around the Agency of Education and contingency plans. We touched on it earlier for just a minute, but what are some of those details about the social distancing? How do you even make that work in a school setting? And then if we layer on top of that cutting budgets, I know you said you can't do it. There's just no way. What would you have to do? What if your budget, was cut by 10% and you had to do that? What would disappear in your school, both educationally for the kids and potentially increasing impact of health risks for your kids if you're unable to spread them out as much between various instructors?
I think that you know, I've been a board member in my hometown, and I have, it says I'm muted. I don't know, hopefully you can still hear me. There we go.
Yep.
I've been a board member in my hometown. I've been a principal for almost 12 years, a couple different districts, and I've never seen a school budget that had fluff in it. Every year they say, well, this is bare bones, bare bones. Like, well, we were bare bones before, so if we're bare bones next year, then I don't know at what point are there no bones left. I really think that, you know, what you would lose, I think certainly the smaller schools would be hurt much harder than that. I think larger schools have a larger capacity to absorb some of that based on you know, just the efficiency of a large school. But, you know, I would lose potentially at the high school level electives, potentially AP courses, because I would need the staff to do other things. I would lose probably some opportunities for dual enrollment classes that my teachers teach to high schoolers. Things that were dreams from Act 77, flexible pathway type stuff that we just wouldn't be able to do. I don't know if sports extracurriculars are going to be part of that kind of conversation, but you know, certainly that's going to be a factor. Yeah, I guess we don't have a ton of at the secondary level, a ton of paras already, so we're pretty bare bones on that end. But certainly, I have a lot of students who are on IEPs who need that level of care from special educators. So I would hate to think of losing any of them. My middle school classes are already pretty full. So if I have less staff and I have to socially distance, I don't have any idea how I would do that. It would involve kids not being in the building, I guess, or some hybrid, which again means putting them back in the homes that they potentially are experiencing trauma in. There's no good answers to that. There's just no good answers.
Thank you. Yeah, Nora, I see you with your thoughts up there.
Things. One was the trauma, I think, is twofold. It's trauma not only that they might be experiencing from being in homes that are having some problems where they're not safe, but there's also the trauma. You know, if you were to walk into our schools right now, it would look like aliens came and abducted all of us. Things were just left, and that has an impact right there on our kids. You know, I'm going to walk back into my classroom. I haven't been allowed in my building since this began, and it's going to be a March date on the whiteboard that I left. You know, when I walked out, all the kids' things are there as if they were coming back the next day. That right there has caused some trauma, and we're going to be dealing with that. I mean, I've talked to parents where kids are in tears, you know, because of not being able to be with their classmates, not being with their teachers. We did a parade through town to see our students, and there were a lot of tears there on both sides. You know, me in my car, seeing all of the kids who I can't be with, and all of the kids, you know, holding up their signs, you know, we miss you, we love you, you know, that outpouring of support. So there's that we're going to be dealing with as well. So I just wanted to mention that this is not just from homes that are insecure. Every single child has been impacted by this. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I think, you know, Governor Scott has done a tremendous job with his leadership on dealing with this crisis until this point. and that I think this is another example. He's tried this before of balancing a budget, of making economic decisions on the back of those people who are most vulnerable, and that's our children. And that needs to stop. This is the time to be putting the resources into our future, into the children of this state, not taking it from those kids that are the most vulnerable.
And I saw Kim had some thoughts to offer, and I was already going to go to Kim to talk about some of those inequities as well, and the inequities in broadband access. You know, you talked about Westford and Essex, which some people around the state might go, well, those towns are better off. So, you know, why would they have issues with inequity? But maybe you can talk about the fact that every community has issues of inequity, and the role as a school board member, what's the role of public schools and teachers in our school and community? So you've got a lot there because I know you wanted to respond to the other thing as well. So just giving you a whole bunch to think about.
Thank you. I think we struggled to ensure that we had access for all families, that we had devices for families. For some of our grades, we had already had one-to-one, but then there are families without internet access. The first several weeks were really spent in trying to figure that out and figuring out how to resolve those problems for families. And at our younger grades, what are the values families hold for the amount of time students might spend in front of the device, even if they had it? So I think those challenges will continue no matter what version this is, no matter where you live. I think the broadband inequities and access have been well known, and I hope that this is the occasion where our state makes the decision that this is an absolute right in the state, and it's an incredibly powerful economic driver. If people can flee their cities and live peacefully in our state and operate their businesses from wherever, we all benefit from that type of support, in addition, of course, to our students and families. I think many of our schools already knew those who were most challenged by the internet access and took that on right away. But I think as more people are working from the same spaces, we learned that that is not something that works quite as well. The capacity in a single home when multiple people are working is problematic. So I think that became obvious. The other equity pieces, which we've all known and have been concerned for, the capacity for support in a home, educators know that better than anybody, but we all have spoken of equity as this critical component of the work we do moving forward. And I think now is precisely the right time to think strategically about what we build moving forward. How also do we support our educators? Because with the new CDC guidelines, it is really hard to imagine how we create the space that they're offering or suggesting is appropriate for the fall. And what does that end up meaning? Educators working from home need to have space and boundaries as well, but now their office and their classroom is their home. They are standing on their heads, our administrators are standing on their heads, and everybody is working in the best interest of children. It is work we have to continue doing together. And I just think it is also a very good time to think almost in a visionary way about what we've learned from this and what we expect moving forward. Because in some cases, creating this kind of flexibility, for instance, for upper level grades may create greater opportunity for them to be interning or working in something that they may learn to be their passion and their desire, which actually helps facilitate the personalized learning that was envisioned in Act 77. So I guess in the glass half full category, I hope we'll have the time and space to breathe and really debrief and hear from our educators and families about what's working and what has been most challenging, and approach that in what 21st century education might look like as we move forward. Take our wins and build from those and really figure out how to approach head on. Equity isn't just about internet access. It is so much more, as all educators know.
Yeah, Joel, I'm curious, you worked trying to advocate for teachers and education for a couple of decades in the political world and talking with teachers all across the state. What do you think, and how do you want to present the role of public schools and teachers for people to be thinking about, both in this moment, but maybe in that visionary way as well that Kim was talking about, is what's the vision we can create? And I'm going to come to all of the guests as we get near the end here with the same question. So, Nora and Bob, you can think about your answer while Joel's on the spot.
It's all that Kim and the others just said and more. It boils down to, what is it that we want our children to experience And what is it we as adults need in order to make that possible? I'm really so empathetic with Bob, what you said about what do you do if there are distance learning, social distancing requirements in our school buildings in Vermont? How do you possibly fill a classroom? I think, for what it's worth, this crisis should put to rest, at least for the time being, all the stated concerns and rhetoric around our student-teacher ratio being too good or too small. We have the best ratio in the country, and it's not going to be good enough in a world of social distancing. We also need to, I think, put to bed the myth that education itself is simply too costly. When you compare the cost of basic childcare to the cost of an education which incorporates obvious large elements of childcare now, we're getting a great deal for the dollars that we're putting into this. I don't have any wisdom at all, but I don't have anything more to add to what the other three folks who are actually in the field have already said about the challenges that we're facing and the vision for the future. But the vision for the future has to include present actions that don't jeopardize that future. And I assumed that Governor Scott's proposal was more a trial balloon than anything else, because to my way of thinking, it makes absolutely no sense from almost any perspective, unless your perspective is simply to find ways to cut spending on our children. And I don't think that makes sense.
Well, he has proposed such things before, freezing the budgets, revoting later, having votes later in the year. He continues to go to this direction of the way out of the problem is to cut schools and cut education, which, if we want to attract families to our state, if we want to bring more people to our rural areas, the last way to do it is to say, let's cut our schools, let's cut our teachers, let's cut the opportunities for kids. So I do agree with you. I'm going to go to Bob and then end with our teacher on the question of the role of our public schools and teachers. Bob, as a former teacher, now principal, you've been in these systems for a while. Of course, so has Nora. How do you sort of frame an answer to that? What are your thoughts on the role of public schools and teachers?
Yeah, well, I would just come back to one of the things that Joel said too. A quick thing: the cost of imprisoning an inmate is well over 4 times the cost of educating a kid. And so, when you're thinking about the gaps you're creating for kids and the pathways that you're creating for those kids in those areas, we're actually, if people want to approach it from a pragmatic standpoint, we're actually potentially saving more money down the long run in the state of Vermont than we are spending if you're increasing spending to education. So that's my little pitch on that one. But I think it's an important one to make, that these kids, what we do with them and where they go and what they do after and what their abilities are is so important for our state, because many of them stay, despite the stats that they're fleeing, that many of them do stay. And we need them to have the skills to keep our economy running. Yeah, my teachers have been working their tails off. I mean, there's no 2 ways about it, but like the rest of us and like the kids, they're drained right now. They are emotionally and physically drained. I have one teacher whose eyes are bothering her because she's looking at screens so much and she's straining her eyes. These people are also, some of them have kids at home they're trying to deal with educating their kids, like I do as well. That's really hard. I think it's tough. We want them to be thinking about the fall, and they're in survival mode as well about the spring, and they're working so hard. I applaud the efforts of all the teachers statewide who've been doing this. I feel like we gave them 2 days or a week to prepare for something that, for the online licensure for distance learning, is a 2-year endorsement. And we gave them a week and we said, here you go do it. And they've been doing an amazing work with that, but they're exhausted. And they need our support because they're the ones that are going to be on the front lines in the fall.
Yeah, indeed. Kim, I saw your hand up, but I'm going to have Nora give her thoughts on this, and then I'll probably wrap it with you, Kim, for the last word. So you get kind of the bonus opportunity there. But Nora, as a teacher, what do you feel your role is in public schools and as a teacher? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What's your role? What's this whole system all about?
Oh,
In a minute and a half.
in a minute and a half. Yeah, sure. You know, I think what we're trying to do is to meet children's academic, social, emotional needs and prepare them for the future in a way that I say the challenge is to do it in a way that's fair and sustainable. You know, thank you, Bob, for your words there. The current situation that we're in is not sustainable. You know, 12-hour days is kind of average for me personally, and I know that's true for all my colleagues as well. To maintain it this way, or to do some sort of hybrid system, it boggles my mind how to do that. So I thank goodness we'll have the summer, hopefully, to figure all of that out. And I would say again, to make sure that teachers and not just teachers, I think all of the support staff have a seat at the table when we're making these decisions on how to do it so that it is fair and sustainable, and that our kids are getting the best that they can possibly get for their education. And I think to do that, it's not, I'll say again, you can't withdraw resources. I think it's going to need an increase in resources. You know, how do you have when the ratio is 1 to 20, because I'm going to say it's about that on average, 1 teacher for 20 students, and you can only have 10 students in a classroom. How do you do that? I don't have the answers. I have a lot of questions.
Absolutely. And I know Kim had a brief thought she wanted to ask about, and it actually fits much in line with some of what I've talked about the last couple of years around social services and our schools and what we're asking teachers to do, which is be more than teachers. I mean, you almost have to be full-time social workers and full-time teachers. And a question back to even Joel's original comments of what schools are taking on and how much of this really is a state obligation versus an education fund obligation. And maybe Kim, you want to touch on that for a minute. And then I have to really thank you all and run off to the State House. But Kim, go ahead.
Sure. I did want to reflect back to Joel's original sentiment. I feel strongly that it is often the case that the safest place for the social services to be delivered are our schools. But this is one of those glaring occasions where we can't physically be together, but we still are offering those services. And it is the right time, I think, to consider to look back at how this is all being parsed out, because if not a particular teacher, certainly everybody cares deeply about these students, and our school districts in general are putting wraparound services in to help our students even be ready to learn. And so our teachers are heroes in this, our school district social workers and all the other services we bring to this safe space for our students and families is being borne at the expense of education alone. And I think it's time for that to be recognized differently and to be considered how that might parse out differently when we're filling this huge hole, frankly. So thank you. It's less inspiring than all the other comments, because the roles and responsibilities of our educators in this, I think, are finally getting the attention and appropriate appreciation they deserve. We really are the center of what our communities are actually able to do right now.
Well, I want to thank all 4 of you. What a quick, truncated amount of time to talk about such an important topic. I want to thank those who have tuned in to watch this either live in the moment or if you watch this later. But I want to encourage people to think about our education system. Those of you who tuned in who are interested in investing in our education rather than cutting our education. And if you have thoughts, ideas, questions on any topic, education related or otherwise, you can always reach out to info@Zuckerman, Vermont.com. That's Zuckerman4Vermont.com. We work to try to answer further questions that come up from these kinds of conversations. This is going to be an ongoing topic, I imagine, all summer long, is figuring out education for the fall. I would say I hope the legislature does not pass any bill calling for a second round of votes. The chaos that would create is just unbelievable in my mind, and the needs of the students would really just not be met if we try to solve it by slashing our way to the bottom. So I'm going to wrap with that. I'm going to thank all four of you for being here. Bob, Nora, Joel, and Kim. Stated in the way I see you on my screen, and everybody's screen is different. But thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to my guests.